Well, I think it's appropriate that after an incredible 2 days here at RestaurantSpaces, the one thing keeping everybody in this room from getting back to work is permitting. My name is Andreas Rotenberg. I'm one of the founders of Pulley. Our mission is to help project teams break ground faster. And today, we're proud to support some of the fastest growing restaurants in the US as they submit, track, and manage permits nationwide. But I actually started my career in retail and restaurant development. And I have to admit to you that it was one of the most stressful times in my life. In fact, after leaving my last job in the industry, I literally went to therapy for a year. And I'm sure there are other folks in this room who can empathize. Some unrealistic expectations out there sometimes, right? If I learned anything in therapy, it's that sometimes to get past a problem, you've got to go back to the beginning and retrace your steps. And that's what I want to do today. I want to explore what went wrong with permitting and how we fix it. Now, a lot of things have gotten better over the last 60 years, but construction is famously not one of them. In fact, whereas labor productivity overall has increased by about 300% in the last 60 years, construction productivity has declined by 6%. But that's a rounding error compared to permitting, which has gotten 400% slower over the last 60 years. I'll just let that sink in. A building that takes 4 months to build might take 16 months to permit and entitle. And relative to 1960, that slowdown in construction productivity cost you about a week, whereas the slowdown in permitting and entitlements has literally added a year to your projects. How did we end up in a world where it takes 4 times longer to permit than to build? Well, the story begins almost 4,000 years ago in ancient Babylon with the introduction of the first building code. You probably learned about this in 10th grade or so, and understandably have forgotten all about it. But there was a legal framework called Hammurabi's Code. It's where we get the phrase, an eye for an eye. And there were no permits and no inspections in ancient Babylon, but there were rules that governed construction, and there were consequences if you didn't follow them. What this quote is saying is that if you did not adhere to the building code and a structure proved to be unsound, the builder was financially responsible for fixing it. The spirit of this approach lives on today in places like New York City, where architects can self-certify that a building is code compliant. They simply promise that they followed the rules, and if a city inspector subsequently disagrees, owners got to fix it. Now, during the Renaissance, we took a different approach to regulating construction. Trade groups called guilds were not just responsible for training master builders, they were also responsible for inspecting and checking their work. And they held each other to an incredibly high standard. Some of our most loved buildings today were built in this way and remain standing proudly about 800 years later. If you think about it, it's very similar to hiring an engineer to conduct a private plan review or an inspection somewhere like Florida. You don't have to really refer back to some city staffer to inspect your plans. You hire one engineer to check another engineer's work. But building permitting, as we know it today, where the jurisdiction authorizes private construction, only came about in the 19th century. Now, following the Industrial Revolution, American cities grew larger and more crowded, and new utilities like gas and electricity became more prevalent. But at the same time, if you walk down the streets of Philadelphia or any other American city, what you would see were timber houses, maybe with tar shingle roofs. And it turns out that this was a very, very dangerous combination. In 1871, there were 25 major urban fires in the United States. During the Great Fire of Chicago, roughly a third of the city burned to the ground. And in Boston, and during a giant fire, the city's newly installed gas lines were actually ignited. And the fire got so bad that the mayor authorized private citizens to start blowing up buildings with gunpowder just to slow down the progression of the fire. Now, I don't know how you all would feel if some private citizens blew up one of your restaurants with gunpowder, but understandably, business owners were not pleased. And they actually petitioned local governments to do something about it. That's right. We asked for permitting. And so cities like Boston and New York set up buildings departments within the fire department in order to ensure that cities were planned and buildings were constructed to withstand the threat of fire. But from a project timeline perspective, the effects here were minimal. Probably just took a few days to get all the approvals you needed to break ground in 1900. So far, permitting seems like a pretty effective solution to a narrowly defined problem. So what happened? Where did all of this go wrong? Well, the pattern that we just saw continued to repeat itself. Every time a new problem emerged, local regulators would introduce some new rules to try to stem it off in the only way that they could think to, by adding. It turns out that human beings are hardwired to solve problems through addition. We're more likely to value the contribution of a colleague who suggests tracking some new metric than one who proposes eliminating a useless meeting. And it's not only that we value addition more. Sometimes we don't even realize that there is a subtractive solution. Two psychologists proved that when making patterns, people are more likely to reach for one or even two Lego blocks rather than just removing one that doesn't belong. The connection to permitting is clear. Over the years, we have continuously added new requirements without ever taking any away. First, we introduced zoning everywhere except Houston, which is pretty clear if you've ever been to Houston. Then came environmental protections, like CEQA in California, which is one of my favorite four-letter words. These are both great ideas in theory, but in practice, as we added more and more regulations, the size of the submittals that we had to make ballooned from 10 sheets in the middle of the 20th century to 50. And as the country grew, we introduced more and more jurisdictions, each with their own rules for approving construction, until there are almost 19,000 today. The people doing the building also changed. Family-owned restaurants building a dining room in their hometown were replaced by all of you. National restaurant groups building all over the place. And so by the eve of the financial crisis in 2009, that project that maybe just took a few days to permit in 1900 took 12 months to break ground. I wish the story ended there, but unfortunately I have one more slide. Following the Great Recession, we were impacted by a massive labor shortage. There weren't enough skilled plans examiners inside cities and towns throughout the US to keep up with the demand, the flow of new applications. And following the pandemic, they all started working from home, which has made it extremely hard to meet with them in person or even get them on the phone. And the result is that today, it's very easy to wait 4 weeks, 8 weeks, more, just to hear back from a city after you make a submission. And all of this is why today it takes 16 months to break ground. More permits, more sheets in a plan set, and more cities taking longer to review them. So how do we fix this? Can we fix this? Well, the obvious answer is to look at what cities could do differently. They could allow for private plan review or self-certification. It's not hard to think about these types of ideas for permitting reform because, as we've just seen, most of these ideas have actually been in practice for thousands of years. The hard part is convincing 19,000 different jurisdictions to do something differently. It took a global pandemic to get these people to accept a PDF rather than a printed plan set. So I want to look at the problem from a different angle. I want to explore what types of new business processes and innovative technologies project teams can adopt in order to deal with the complexity posed by permitting in 2024 and beyond. And I want to look at 3 areas in particular. First, how do we make local permitting requirements clear and accessible to everybody? Second, how do we speed up the process of actually making submittals? And third, how could we better and more efficiently check drawings for code compliance? Now, whether you're a national restaurant group or even just a regional developer in Southern California, the odds are that every time you start a new project, it's in a jurisdiction where you haven't built for at least 5 years, which means someone on your team is having to do a lot of research to understand what the permitting requirements are. You're basically starting from a blank piece of paper. A solution like Pulley enables you to understand exactly which permits, submittals, and submittal items are required, as well as to forecast the overall time to approval. But what if we could provide you with preliminary due diligence on a site just by analyzing the project data that already lives in the tools that you use, like Procore or Autodesk? Well, with the right product integrations and improvements with computer vision, we might be closer than you think. Second, speeding up submittals. We use software to manage every aspect of construction today, except for permitting. And so it's not surprising that this is an area where balls are regularly dropped. Again, Pulley breaks permitting down into a discrete set of tasks, each with a single assignee and due date. Just like everything else in life, creating the right accountability and deadlines gets results. And there are other companies building really wonderful solutions to help project teams hit those deadlines, like TestFit. TestFit allows civil engineers and owners to try different layouts on a site in just a few seconds and then to update their site plans. And advances in generative AI could enable architects and engineers to prepare complete sets of CDs in a fraction of the time it takes today. We could be talking about saving 2 weeks per submittal or 2 months over the lifetime of a ground-up project. And the best part is, you don't need the city to do anything differently. This is entirely within your control. Finally, how do we accelerate code review? Now, we say at Pulley, everyone has to go through plan review once. No one has to go through plan review 5 times. But it happens every day. And the best way to improve permitting timelines is to submit great plans. It's not enough to hire great design consultants. You also need them to work together. Design collaboration tools like Bluebeam enables just that architects and engineers can get on the same page and prepare an internally coherent submittal. Imagine if city staff used those same tools that designers do. We could be quickly iterating and resolving comments practically in real time. I wouldn't hold your breath, but I think over some time horizon, this is possible. And the same is true with code analysis tools. Companies like Upcodes have made it possible to search and visually interpret the building code. But what if software could actually flag common types of issues to architects and city staff? We could reduce the time that it takes to scrub a 50-page submittal from a few days to just a few minutes. I guess the point I'm making is that if the problem with permitting has been continuous addition over the last 100 years, the solution has to be simplifying. One platform that organizes permitting in every jurisdiction, backed by local experts, and assisted by intelligent systems. The good news is that's exactly what we're building here at Pulley. This really could be the first decade in 150 years since the advent of permitting that outcomes actually get better. I think everyone in this room knows that there are no silver bullets when it comes to permitting, and we don't claim to have one. It will never get easier, but I genuinely believe that together we can go faster. Thanks for listening.